Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am sitting in Paso Robles with Steve Gleason of Four Lanterns Winery. Steve, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us a little bit about Four Lanterns.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. We've had a lovely morning sharing coffee with you. So Four Lanterns, it's really a mom and pop shop. It's my wife and I. Yes, we have a handful of employees that work in the taste room and a couple people helping me make the wine. We're on 46 West in Paso Robles, about 3 miles in from the 101. We make predominantly Rhône and Bordeaux wines, but I'm a big, color outside the line person, so, it's not infrequent that I'll make other styles.
Okay. And do you own all your vineyards, or are you sourcing fruit or a combination?
Predominantly estate grown. I don't like to prohibit myself from maybe buying some cool fruit I find from a really nice vineyard, but by and large, we're 90+% estate grown. This year will be 100% unless I find some really cool fruit that I want to make.
And what's your total estate vineyard planting?
It's in flux right now, and when all of the fruit comes in, because we have 2 very old vineyards, and as most people know, at some point in time, the yield on the vineyard starts to diminish. Sometimes there are diseases that vines can get, so you have to replace them periodically. Hopefully periodically is every 30 years or so. So these are older than 30-year-old vineyards, and so we're in the process of updating them, changing some of the varietals in them, giving me a chance to plant some cool grapes that we may have not had before. So in all, we have 2 vineyards. One's on a 20-acre plot, the other's on 35 acres. The 35-acre property has 22 acres planted, and the 20-acre property has 16 planted.
Okay. And your total case production?
About 2,000 cases.
And are you 100% direct-to-consumer, in distribution, in various markets? Where can people find your wines?
Pretty much at our place. So we're a DTC winery. We do sell quite a bit of wine online. We have wine club members all over the country. And, you can from time to time find wine in a nice restaurant, but that's usually the chef or the owner or the sommelier come into our tasting room, really like the wine, and they want to have it in their restaurant. So other than that, you won't find it anywhere else.
Ooh, a hidden gem that I'm exploring for everyone here. So tell me, Steve, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Wow. Okay, so I grew up in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. And I guess my very first memory is not as significant, but we always had wine at the table.
Wow.
For big, Christmas, Easter, whatever. And my parents always made sure that the kids had a little glass. I could still picture those little tiny glasses we had with little wine, which we didn't particularly enjoy, but it was part of the event. But then when I got a little bit older, and I'm probably dating myself, but when I was growing up, the drinking age in New York was 18 years. And, it was a flexible number. So my girlfriend, when I was in high school, worked at the old Gold Seal winery on Keuka Lake. And I was, 16, 17 years old, and I would go up and sit at the end of the bar while she was pouring for all the customers, and she would always make sure my glass was full. So that's kind of my real initial memory of drinking wine.
Well, so when you were legally allowed to drink and obviously moved on beyond what someone would pour in your glass, is there a particular wine that stands out, one of those memorable wines that was an aha moment? For whatever reason, it was an aha moment, but what is that wine, and what did it kind of awaken you?
So I've got 2 of those, and if I'm rambling, just cut me off and we'll go on to your next question. The first, there's always wine around, and I was fortunate at an early point in my career to work in Tokyo. And we were at a business dinner at Spago's in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm a kid from upstate New York, so somebody gave me the wine list and said, pick a wine, and I picked the cheapest wine on the list because it was expensive, and I'm just an upstate New York kid. One of the other guys said, give me that. He takes the wine list away, and he ordered the wine.
The most expensive one on the list, right?
It wasn't the most expensive, but it was a very nice wine, and it was Italian wine. I don't remember the brand, but that was an aha moment. I was like, oh my gosh, because wine had been around forever, and of course, upstate New York wine at the time was a little rough. I just was astounded. I couldn't believe how wonderful the wine was, and the food was wonderful, and it was great. So that's kind of the first one. The second one wasn't an aha moment in terms of, oh my God, wine's great. It was an aha moment for me as a consumer. I had read an article back in the day. The Wall Street Journal used to have a wine section. That was before they had their weekend section on Fridays. They had one article, and it was a great article. It was written by a couple, but I think predominantly the wife did most of the writing. I think she's still doing it today. And she wrote about Barolos, and the king of wines, and just these flowery, wonderful article about Barolos, and I'd never heard of Barolo before. This is probably in the early 90s. So on the way home from work, I went, but there was a really nice wine store on the way home, and I bought a bottle of Barolo. Just couldn't wait, right? So it's a great story because in my mind, and at the time, we predominantly drank Napa Cabernets, which were much less expensive back then than they are now. But it was, so for me, that was red wine. It was Napa Cabernet in that taste profile, and I was just locked into that wine.
Right.
Barolo's not that at all, which you know, and I can see you smiling and nodding your head here, which your listeners can't see. But so we get home, and I open up this bottle, and I'm thinking this is going to be the biggest, baddest Napa cab that I ever had in my life, but it comes from Italy. And my wife and I made this great meal, and we sat down to drink the wine, and I took a sip, and I was like, this is terrible, right? Well, it's not terrible. No. Barolo is one of the great wines of the world, but I couldn't get out of my own way mentally. But I didn't say anything. My wife sipped it, and she said, oh my God, this is the best wine I ever had in my life. And I looked at her like, are you crazy? By the time we got to the end of that bottle, I was like, she's right. And the problem was my preconceived notion about what that wine should taste like initially ruined it for me. And if my wife hadn't had an open mind and made me rethink how I was thinking, I would have missed it.
Well, so if we were to come to your home today, what kind of wines would we find in your cellar or in your closet or in your refrigerator?
You would find a lot of different wines. You would find some Barolos, definitely. We have an array of French wines. We have a lot of Paso Robles wines because we live here in Paso Robles, and our friends make wine too. And so there's quite a bit of wines in there. What you may not find much of, which is kind of strange, is white wines. Both my wife and I love white wine, but we never seem to buy it when we go out. If we're at a winery, we'll buy white wine, but it doesn't get into the wine cellar. And when it does, we drink them before we can replenish them. Where the reds, you get them in there, you want to save them for a long time and all that. So there's a bunch of reds there, but we're just a little short on white wine, and it always seems to be the case.
Well, it sounds like you're drinking a lot of them. So I'm wondering if there is a particular wine you opened last night or recently that drank really well. And maybe it was the white wine you finished off in your house. I don't know, or maybe it was a red.
Yeah, it was. Well, last night it was a red wine. It's a little chilly here in Paso this time of year, so I tend to drink more reds when it's cold. And it was our GSM, which you tasted yesterday. It's actually an MSG. So for people, if I'm throwing jargon around, GSM stands for Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre, which is a very common blend here in Paso Robles. And it mimics the classic Chateauneuf de Pape blends, which are predominantly those three grapes. The one we drank that I made several years ago is an MSG, meaning that the highest concentration of the 3 grapes is Mourvedre.
Right. We're not speaking about that sodium thing that they put in food,
No.
MSG.
Yeah.
And what was the vintage of the wine?
It was a 2019.
Okay. So I'm wondering, do you think there is a such thing as a perfect variety? I mean, you're just talking now about doing a blend. Do you think there's a perfect variety?
I'm more in like a lot of different varieties. At the short time you've come to know me, you know that I'm like all over the place, and I don't like to be constrained, and I like to try new things and do different things. So I'm and you can tell our vineyards. I mean, economically, it doesn't make perfect sense, but we have probably 15 different varietals on 2 small vineyards. That's a lot. So several of the blocks are an acre and a quarter, right? So I'm sure the commercial winemakers that listen to that go, that guy's a nut, right? You should have 5-10 acre blocks and just go with that. Well, I make a lot of different SKUs because I like to make a lot of different wines. And so that's how I planted it.
Yeah. So perfection is not the key in one variety. It's about the beauty that you can get through blends, different grapes, and everything. So my question for you is this. If space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with?
I would probably go, are they friendly or evil?
Let's go friendly.
Okay.
Because if they're evil, I'm sure you're not sharing your wine.
Yeah. Well, if they're evil, I might need to bribe them so that, they could tear us. So if they're friendly, I'd walk them through the list. I would just take them back in the barrel room and we'd work our way through so they could try everything to see what fits their palate. If they were evil, I'd give them this one that I just gave you.
Which is,
we call it calcareous, which is a Greek word that means grace. And it's a blend of Syrah, Cabernet Franc, and Tempranillo. So it's complex, it's deep, it takes a little bit of time to think about, and so if they're evil, maybe that'll slow them down a little and let the rest of us run away or something. I don't know. Maybe we'll flip them to our side.
Right. So, I asked you a second ago about perfect variety kind of thing. We're talking about wines that, you would want to entice a customer with. And I'm curious, a lot of people are driven by scores. That's how they kind of find wines and things like that. What's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
Boy, it depends on what they gave me.
Of course.
So here's the problem. The good thing about scores is they make it easy. As a consumer, my brother-in-law, he's like, if it's above 90 and below $50, that's in his wheelhouse, right? The problem is people should, and one of the fun things about wine is discovering what your own palate is and what resonates with you. That doesn't necessarily mean it resonates with the person who scored the wine. And you have to recognize that if it's a big publication, they really need to have wines that their customers can find, right? So we don't really fit into that category because you're not going to walk into a store in, Texas or Florida and find our wine. So those big publications need to have wines that their customers, it does you no good to read about it when you can't get it, right? So they want to have things that their customers can find. So they provide a great service to the broad array of the winemaking community, but at some point, I think you have to start defining your own palate and understanding what you really like. And you need to be adventuresome. You got to go out and taste new things and try different things. Like my example about drinking the Barolo is a great one, right? I had it in my head what wine's supposed to be, and that kept me from really understanding what turned out to be one of my favorite wines in the world. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you said wine has to resonate with you and to be an open mind. So taking out what you make, you as a wine drinker, one word question, answer. Red, white, rosé.
All.
Still or sparkling?
Both. Does everybody answer it the same way?
Many people feel that way. I mean, why limit yourself?
Right, and it's what's the weather like? What's your mood like? What's your wife's mood? What food are you eating? How great was your day at work, or how bad was your day at work? That all different wines, right?
Well, speaking of what you're eating, how do you feel about pairing food and wine? Do you think there are hard and fast rules that one should follow, white wine and fish, red wine and, meat, or do you take a little more come what may indifferent approach or a more systematic approach?
So the hard and fast rules are there and they're useful, but of course I like to break the rules. So fish, salmon with a really nice Grenache or Pinot Noir. Neither one of those are white wines, but they're fabulous with the salmon or a swordfish, right? So, and there's the other, like foods from like places. So if you think about a really nice Italian meal that Italian wines go with, then, why? Well, it's because for centuries they've been going along together and figuring that out, right? So you can take advantage of that knowledge base. There are other things like acid in food and acid or lack thereof in the wine that's worth thinking about when you're pairing. So yes, the rules are helpful, but you shouldn't be afraid to break them.
So for someone who hasn't had the pleasure to taste Four Lanterns wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Balance. The wines are very balanced. We work very hard at them. We're very diligent about them. And we get people coming into the winery and they drink the wine and they go, "Oh, it's you're an artist," and I go, "It's maybe an artisan, but an artist is different." A lot of making wine is just pure hard work and being diligent and paying attention to the minute details. So I think all of that, the passion we put into it, comes through in the wine.
So you talk about balance and being really attentive to detail, and you own your own estates, state vineyards, and you live on your property or very close to it. And I'm curious, you spend time in the vineyard. What do you feel? We know every vintage tells a different story, but do you feel that you see more similarity year to year or more differentiation from year to year? What do you kind of witness as you've been spending time in your vineyard over these years?
Well, Paso, I guess all wine regions are like this. Year to year can be significantly different. We had a huge heat spike right as we're going into harvest last year, and that has a significant impact on wine, how you make the wine, when you decide to pick the grapes. This year we've got a huge amount of water, so that's going to change how we treat the vines in the vineyard as it comes closer and closer to fall. Some years we might get an earlier frost, and you've got to make sure you get your fruit in before that happens. Early frost and harvest. An early frost in the spring is okay.
Right.
Late frost in the spring is a disaster. So it's different every year. I think one of the nice things about Paso and probably California as a whole is that by and large, even though we focus on the minutia, the weather patterns are not horrible. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're in Bordeaux and there's a hailstorm in the middle of the summer that wipes out half your crop. Right.
Knock on wood, that never happens.
Yeah, it could, but it just hasn't yet. Yes, we're all very sensitive to the differences vintage to vintage, but I think we're pretty fortunate here that some of the major weather issues that other regions face are kind of mitigated by this nice little area that we live in.
And when you're walking through your vines and your vineyards, do you talk to your vines? What sort of relationship do you have with them?
Yes. But it's more, I remember when we first bought the vineyard, there were a lot of kind of scraggly trees out there because the prior owners as time went on, they had less energy and they put less effort into taking care of those little things. So when I bought it, I had to go and kind of catch up. So when you're taking a tree out of a vineyard, you got to drop that tree perfectly between the rows, or you're going to wipe out a lot of vines, right? So if I wasn't quite perfect and I kind of smashed a couple of vines, I would apologize and say, "I'm really sorry, guys. I don't feel bad," But that's
so you have a little rapport with your vines.
Yeah, they don't talk back much, but yeah, I talk to them.
Oh, that's good. And are there any good luck rituals that you have established that you do at the start of harvest or maybe at the end?
I don't know. I don't think really. I mean, there are things we do, like we completely power wash and clean everything. But I think that's a normal thing that people
It's a ritual, in a way.
It is kind of a ritual. It's prepping. I almost think of, you think of surgeons before they go in, they wash everything, their hands and everything like that. We wash everything. And so one thing we have done recently, which is kind of fun, there's a company out of France that has isolated some of the native yeasts that people talk about. When they talk about natural fermentation, there are yeasts that kind of initiate a fermentation. They can't finish it because they are relatively intolerant to higher alcohol levels. So you need, I don't want to be too geeky, but Saccharomyces cerevisiae to get past 4 or 5% alcohol. Mm-hmm. But there are other, call them local or yeasts that are more sensitive to alcohol. So they actually isolated those and propagated those. So the nice thing about that is that can help crowd out spoilage yeast and spoilage bacteria. So the last few years, after we clean and sanitize everything, we'll go through and spray it all with yeast. Yeah.
A little yeast party.
Yeah. So it doesn't make the stainless steel looks a little smudgy, but I think it's actually better that way.
So, Steve, when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Thurman Munson. So for those of you who don't know, he was catcher for the New York Yankees because,
And when you realized you couldn't be another existing person, what did you want to do?
Yeah, I couldn't hit the curve. That was the problem. But I did play catcher. So what did I want to be? So I had a whole different career. This is really a second career for me. I started out as a little junior trader on Wall Street, and then I became a bond trader and a bond salesman, and then I worked for a big company, PIMCO, was a money management firm. So I had a whole different career. And then, at 30 years of doing that's enough, and I decided I wanted to do something else, and here I am. Working
with your hands.
Yes, and I'll tell you, so people who are familiar with the financial world know that a large portion of your pay is at the bonus at the end of the year. And I would always wear, this is the place I work, cufflinks, button down, white shirts, very formal suits, and I would always wear a blue shirt.
Rebel you.
Yeah, well, my boss said to me, he goes, every year you wear a blue shirt. And I go, yeah, I don't want to forget my blue-collar roots, because if this doesn't work out, I know where I'm going.
So when you're not working, how do you like to spend your free time?
I don't have much. We just went skiing. I love to ski. And that's kind of nice, because for winemakers, you're ramping up through the summer to get ready for harvest. Then harvest happens, and that's a 7-day-a-week, 12 to 16 hours a day for 3 or 4 months, which kind of, you get everything barreled down right as you're going into the holidays. And so you finally get to take a breath around early January.
Just in time to ski.
Great time to go skiing. Oh my gosh! It's kind of like we always have this. My wife and I, we're going to go skiing, and at the end of harvest, we get through the house, we're going to go skiing, and we always look forward to that as a way of, it's not that I don't love my job, but at the end of harvest, you're just tired and sore. Yeah. It's time to do something else.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you were a catcher and you had wanted to be a baseball player at one point. Are you still a big fan? the Mets. What did you say?
Yankees.
Oh, Yankees. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, big New York faux pas. Sorry.
There's people in the background cringing here.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend the New Yorker. No, but are you still a big Yankees fan, or is there another team that you're a big fan of these days in another sport?
So actually, for me, I stopped playing baseball and switched to lacrosse.
Oh.
Because I'm from New York, and lacrosse is a big sport in New York. And my high school, that was kind of the big sport in my high school. So I played lacrosse in college, and so completely left the whole baseball thing. And I was a big Yankees fan, but I haven't lived in New York in a long time, and it's just,
You're not loyal, even though you've left the coast?
Well, if anybody's going to win, I want it to be the Yankees, but I really don't spend much time watching baseball anymore. And think about the World Series in the middle of harvest. I can't watch the World Series.
True. Right? Well, let's say the Yankees were to win the World Series. Yeah. Which of your wines would you want to gift them with?
Oh, the sparkling wine, of course.
Do you make a sparkling wine?
I do.
And tell me about that wine.
It's kind of fun. So as a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, know that the three dominant grapes in Champagne are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Well, I don't grow any of those, but Viognier is kind of similar to Chardonnay in terms of, acidity and heft, if you will. It's not a really great wine word, but I just used it anyhow. But anyhow, I thought maybe I'll make a sparkling Viognier. And we did, the method Champenois. We did the traditional way of making it. We aged it for 2 years on the lees, and interestingly, zero dosage, meaning we didn't put any residual sugar, which a lot of people know that normally in a bottle of sparkling wine or champagne, there's probably 5 to 15 grams, if you're in the brut or extra brut range, of residual sugar. So ours is 0. So very crisp, clean. You get a little bit of that briocheness from the surly aging. It's a really pretty wine.
So, speaking of sparkling wine and just thinking of pretty things, I know you said you came back from a ski trip with your wife and you have very little free time, but when you are planning a romantic evening for the two of you, what kind of wines make for a romantic evening?
Lots.
You mean consuming lots of wine?
Yeah. We frequently will have... let's say we're doing this at home, right? Because some restaurants you get multiple wines with the different food you're having. But we'll usually have 2 different wines. Normally a white to start. Frequently, it even starts before that. So it's, you get home and you're pulling all this food out of the refrigerator and you're thinking about what are we going to make and blah, 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 blah. So it's always fun to have a glass of wine while you're doing that. It's just kind of the anticipation and the fun of prepping for dinner and thinking about what you're going to make, and so that usually goes with a glass of white wine. For us, it's either Picpoul Blanc or Viognier, mostly. It could be sparkling wine, and then if we're doing some kind of appetizer, we may continue with that same wine, or we may switch to another one. Now, for the people who are listening, they're like, oh my gosh, how much money are you going to spend on wine in an evening? But you've got to realize that, we get done at the tasting room and there's all these half empty bottles from the day, so we can choose, any one of those to take home.
You're swimming in wine.
We're swimming in wine, right? And if you've got a third of a bottle, to get 2 glasses out of that to just sip on while you're figuring out what you're going to eat, it's great. And then, of course, if it's, back to your earlier question, if it's a meat or a heavier food, we'll switch to red at some point.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like any night you come home with open bottles from the tasting room makes for a romantic evening.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. And we have so much fun just coming home and baking and cooking and doing that. Well, not baking, cooking, not baking. But it really is fun. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, when you look back at your life and your career, is there a piece of advice that someone once gave you that you sort of carry with you in how to work, how to live, how to enjoy?
I keep saying I shouldn't do that, but I'm not sure it's a piece of advice, but I have a good friend here who's a chef in town, and we have this, this ongoing joke that comes up all the time, because people always ask him for recipes. I've never seen him look at a recipe. The guy is a rock star, but I've never seen him look at a recipe. But people, they'll have a meal that he's made for some event or something, and they'll ask him for a recipe. And he says it's a lifestyle, it's not a recipe. That's pretty much it right there. So it's the same with us. And people ask me about, I've heard people say recipe and referring to wine. They say, oh, they changed the recipe. And I'm like, it's not really a recipe. It's a lifestyle. And so, it's the idea is you live the life that you want to live. And then things like the lack of financial reward for running a winery don't matter anymore, because the reward is in how you live. So it's a lifestyle.
So be present and enjoy life as what you have, not what you want.
Well, want what you have. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah.
Very true. So when you look back at your career, and it could be at any point in your career and in previous lives, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
It's a long story. So I worked in my prior, I can tell you a wine story. I think I told it to you yesterday, actually, but in my prior life, in my financial life, I worked with and I don't want to say who it is, but it's a large union's retirement plan. Okay, so national, very large pool of money. And as we were going into the financial crisis, the real estate crash, I had convinced the board to move into kind of a new and different financial investment. And better than lucky than smart, it actually paid off extremely well in the real estate crash. And in the middle of the crash, I went to them and said, it's time to sell this. And they didn't want to, because everything else was going down.
Right.
And they were having a very difficult time financially, and they're responsible for paying pensions for all these, well, I can't say what the workers did, but for all these workers. So anyhow, I convinced them, not just me, I brought other people from our firm in too, to switch into a portfolio that actually contained mortgage-backed securities, which was a dirty word in the investment community at the time, and they did. And we all know in hindsight that collateralized mortgage-backed securities did extremely well coming back on the backside of that recession. And the two of the trustees took me aside and they said, you saved our plan. So when I think back about that and all those people that
you saved in a way.
Well, I didn't save them, but I helped them retire a little better. And that's kind of a nice thing. So that's it's not my wine story, but that's the...
But when you look back in your life, I mean, proudest achievement, and I say it has to be worker life, because most people say, oh, my kids, or oh, my successful, marriage or something, which is an achievement on itself, but...
Yeah, I don't look at my kids as an achievement. They are who they are. So you want me to tell the wine one?
Yeah, quickly.
I know.
We're almost finished.
I told you I ramble a lot. And I told it to you yesterday that there's a woman that comes into the winery who's just staff favorite. Everybody loves her. She's early 80s. Her kids are wonderful. Her grandkids are wonderful. They all come into the winery from time to time. And we have this reserve wine that it's a Reserve Merlot. We have a couple different reserves, but the Reserve Merlot. So she came in, and of course any wine we have, I'll pour for her. So I opened it up and poured it for her, and she broke into tears.
Well, let me see if I can get you to cry.
I could if I tell you that story.
Okay, we're sitting at a table here, and there's an empty seat at the table.
Yes.
Who from any walk of life, famous or not famous, would you want to be sharing a bottle of Four Lanterns wine with?
Alive?
It's up to you.
Well, okay, let's exclude family members.
Okay.
Because that would be a layup. Anyone, any walk of life. I don't know. I'm going to say like a weird but yet obvious.
Okay.
Einstein. Because that freaky hair, right? And I give him, actually this wine would be great for him that I gave you. Just because it's like a weird and different wine.
Yeah.
And just to have him go, this is good, I like this.
So I want you to complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
a sauna without a shower. I don't know. What do you want me to say?
Wow.
It's like a day without sunshine. I mean, like, bleh. Yeah.
Well, Steve, I mean, I really don't know where to go after that answer. No, but you have been great. We are almost finished. I've got 2 questions left for you. One is the little game we're going to play, as I warned you about at the beginning.
I'm still nervous about that.
Because we know that wine and music pair well together. They fit moods and they change our sort of mood. And I'm curious, based on some of your wines that we've spoken about and that you produce, if you can pair them with music. So, to start with, you said you make a sparkling Viognier. Tell me, what would you want to listen to?
Probably like a classic rock female singer.
Okay.
You know, maybe, I don't want to say Joni Mitchell, but yeah, in that Joni Mitchell, Linda Ronstadt, somebody like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be kind of like, so, well, Linda Ronstadt, that voice is just like, wow, but it makes you feel, you know, it almost resonates inside of you. It's kind of cool.
What about, you mentioned that if you were going to start a meal with a white wine, a lot of times it's a peak pool. So what about peak pool?
Peak pool, I'd probably like a little kind of funky jazz thing. I'd go with that.
Okay.
You know, a little pop behind it, a little syncopation, a little bubbly feeling, even though we're not talking about sparkling anymore.
And what about your MSG wine?
Ooh, MSG would be like a 80s country Waylon Jennings type of thing.
Okay. And last but not least, the bottle that I've got sitting in here, the Calcareous, which is the unique blend of Cabernet, Cabernet Franc, Syrah, and Tempranillo.
So that one, not sure what the genre would be, but it'd be quiet and it'd be in the background and you'd be sitting by a fire and just sipping the wine and thinking about life's great things.
So I'm going to sit back, sip the wine by a fireplace. Good. But meanwhile, I'm curious, where in the world, I'm in Paso Robles, so I'm traveling right now, but where in the world is on the top of your bucket list to go explore, wine-wise?
That's easy because my wife and I are going to Piedmonte in about 5 weeks.
Ooh.
So we're going to actually go taste the Barolo in Barolo.
That sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Last question. Deserted island, 3 wines, what would you take?
Okay. I would take our sparkling, just because it's a deserted island. Grenache. I love just a light, beautiful Grenache. And then, does cognac count?
Sure.
Cognac, because you're going to need it.
Well, Steve, you've been great. Thank you for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack. And just before we go, if you can remind listeners where they can find you and how they can taste your wines.
Well, if you're lucky enough to be in Paso Robles, we are on 46 West. So if you get off the 101, you head towards the ocean. We're about 3 miles in. If you want to look for us online, it's fourlanternswinery.com.
Well, great. So head to Paso Robles or go online. And Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I was nervous. It was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. That was great. Thank you, Allison.
Good to know that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.